All right, let's get right into it. What if I told you the secret to getting what you want isn't about being the smartest person in the room or the most aggressive? What if it's not even about finding some perfect win-win compromise? What if it's all about emotion? Today, we're breaking down Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. This guy was the FBI's lead international kidnapping negotiator. So yeah, he's taken the hardcore, field-tested tools from literal life-or-death situations and figured out how we can use them in our everyday life. To really get where these ideas come from, you have to picture this. It's 1993, a Chase Manhattan bank in Brooklyn. Two guys in masks burst in. One of them smacks a guard with his gun, shoves it in a teller's mouth, and pulls the trigger. Click. Nothing. It's an empty chamber. And then he says, "Next one is real. Now open the vault." This was one of Chris Voss's first big cases. And it's in moments just like this, where a single wrong word gets someone killed, that this whole new way of negotiating was born.
And that really brings us to the core question, doesn't it? How in the world do you negotiate with someone who isn't playing by the rules of logic? Someone who's completely driven by fear or desperation or just plain delusion? The old way of doing things, well, it had no answer for that.
You see, for years and years, the gold standard for any kind of negotiation was all about logical, rational problem solving. But as the FBI found out in the absolute worst way possible, sometimes that approach doesn't just fail, it gets people killed. The big theory back then came from a famous book called Getting to Yes, and it basically assumed everyone at the table was a rational person looking for a good deal. But then came the sieges at Ruby Ridge and Waco in the early 90s. The FBI was trying to find a logical, win-win solution with people who genuinely believed they were messiahs. And it was a complete and utter disaster. These failures made it painfully clear that they needed a whole new playbook. So this forced a huge shift in thinking. The FBI moved away from this old-school model based purely on logic, trying to reason someone into seeing your point of view. Instead, they developed a totally new set of rules built on understanding one thing: human emotion. And the cornerstone of this entire new system is something Voss calls tactical empathy. And this is the absolute heart of the whole book. It's not about being soft. It's not about being weak or giving in. It's about gaining a strategic advantage by leveraging the one thing we all have in common: human nature. So, what is tactical empathy? It's not about agreeing with someone. You don't even have to like them. It's about understanding their perspective so well that you can see exactly what's driving them. It's not sympathy, feeling sorry for them. It's a tool. It's a way to gather information and influence what they do next by recognizing the feelings behind their words. So why does this work so well? Well, because science has shown us, pretty conclusively, that we aren't logical creatures. The work of Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman shows that our brains have two systems. You've got System 1, which is fast, instinctive, and emotional. That's the real boss. Then there's System 2, our slow, logical brain, which basically just shows up later to justify the decisions System 1 already made. So if you're only talking to their logic, you're not actually talking to the one in charge. Okay, so that's the big idea. But how do you actually use it? Let's open up the negotiator's toolkit. We're going to pull out 3 incredibly simple but powerful techniques you can literally start using the second this is over. The first tool is called mirroring, and it sounds almost too simple to actually work, but trust me, it's amazingly effective. All you do is repeat the last 1 to 3 words the other person just said, but as a question. It's a natural thing we do anyway, and it builds an instant connection. It basically sends a signal that says, "Hey, I'm listening, I hear you, and we're on the same page." And it makes the other person feel safe enough to just keep talking. To see just how powerful this is, let's go back to that bank robbery. Voss is on the phone with the head robber. The guy says the police had chased his driver away. So Voss just mirrors him. "We chased your driver away?" That one simple question made the robber go on this huge rant, and in the process, he gave up all these crucial details about his accomplices that the FBI had no idea about. He literally, as Voss puts it, vomited information. Okay, tool number 2 is labeling. This is where you call out the other person's feelings. You don't have to agree with the feeling, you just have to identify it. You use phrases like, "It seems like you're feeling frustrated," or "It sounds like you're worried about this part." What this does is it diffuses all those negative emotions. It's like letting the air out of a balloon before it pops. It shows you're paying attention to them, not just to what they're saying. Think about how this worked in a real 6-hour standoff with armed fugitives in Harlem. The negotiators didn't argue, they didn't try to reason. For hours, they just labeled the fugitives' fears. They'd say things like, "It seems like you're worried that if you open that door, we're going to come in with guns blazing. It looks like you really don't want to go back to jail." By just calling out all that negativity, they totally calmed the situation down. The fugitives ended up surrendering peacefully, and they even told the negotiators, "You calmed us down." And that brings us to the final and maybe the most powerful tool of all, the calibrated question. These are carefully designed open-ended questions that usually start with how or what. They're brilliant because they can't be answered with a simple yes or no. They force the other person to stop and think. The most famous one is, how am I supposed to do that? It's a verbal judo move. It makes them look at the problem from your perspective and forces them to help you solve it. And the effectiveness of this is just perfectly captured in the story about Voss visiting Harvard Law School. So get this, he's challenged to a negotiation roleplay by a top professor. The professor demands a ransom. Voss just calmly replies with calibrated questions like, how am I supposed to get that kind of money, and how do I know the hostage is even alive? The professor gets more and more frustrated because he has no good answers. And finally, he just gives up and says, fine, I suppose the FBI might have something to teach us. So you might be thinking, okay, this is all great for hostage standoffs, but what about my life? Well, the real magic here is that these skills apply to absolutely everything, because really, every single interaction we have is a kind of negotiation.
You can use mirroring to build an instant rapport with that difficult colleague at work. You can label your child's frustration to completely calm down a tantrum. You can use calibrated questions to make your boss justify their salary offer. And in doing that, you actually make them solve the problem of how to pay you more. These tools aren't for hostage takers. They're for anyone who has to deal with other human beings. And that brings us right to the final and most mind-bending takeaway from this entire book. Real mastery in negotiation isn't about overpowering someone or forcing them to do what you want. No, it's about gently guiding them to your solution, all while making them feel like it was their idea the whole time. By using these tools, you give the other person the illusion of control, which, as it turns out, is how you get all the real control you'll ever need.